It's time for the Daily Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Planet Podcast, your weekly podcast for all things movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly and I am your host, and I am joined once again by my co-host, Matt Freeman. Matt, welcome back. I hope you're feeling better.
It's good to be back. I am fully rehabilitated from the Black Plague, which I caught from my children, and ready to participate in this show, which I've been looking forward to, actually. What are we doing today, Scott?
We're doing the next step in our Deconstructing of Director series. We are deconstructing Edgar Wright, the British writer, director, producer of such films as Shaun of the Dead and The World's End and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the cult hit. I am very excited about this too. I love this guy. I love this series. I like doing these a lot. And I think the last one we did was Wes Anderson, right?
Yeah.
And this, I gotta say, I enjoyed watching these movies the most of all the ones we've done so far, which was kind of surprising to me. Because I love Wes Anderson, I love Tarantino, but I had the most amount of fun sitting down and watching these 4 films again.
Yeah, he is a really fun director, and there's a lot of craft on display. And I think he's an extremely underrated director because most people either don't know about these movies, which is kind of shocking to me, or they've seen them, but they just didn't leave a huge impression. And hopefully in this discussion, we can convince you, the listener, that these are great and they at least deserve, to be revisited or watched if you haven't seen them.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope people, because Edgar Wright, I think the one word I would use to describe him is layered. All his films have many, many layers to them. They have a surface level thing and then many different things underneath them that rewatches reward and thinking about them reward. So absolutely, I hope we can convince people to revisit some of these movies. But before we get into all that, Matt, I wanted to talk some news with you. We've got some good news.
All right.
Some hilarious news, and some bad news.
Okay, hit me.
All right, the first thing I wanted to start with is there was a rumor that came out today that Winds of Winter, the sixth book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, was going to have a March 2017 release date. I think what happened was the France Amazon put up that release date on their site, and all the sites grabbed onto it because people want this book really badly. Unfortunately, a few hours after that, George R. R. Martin's publicist came out and said that it was absolutely false, and any book release date notification would come directly from him and not through all this other stuff. So we are not getting the book in March of 2017, Matt.
Well, that begs the question, was the error going to be too soon or too late? Meaning, do you think we're going to see the book before then, or is it going to be after March of 2017?
I think it's going to be after.
Yeah, I think you're right, unfortunately.
Sometimes, Amazon is notorious for this, just plugging in whatever date for whatever. So I'm kind of surprised this got picked up at all. But the initial reporter of the story, Entertainment Weekly, was very careful to put a lot of language into their story that there's probably no truth to this at all, and yet everyone else picked it up.
Yeah, right. I mean, people are so hungry for this, so makes sense.
Yeah, I still think. Well, we're getting a delayed season 7. Yeah, season 7. These books, the book numbers to the season numbers really confuse me now. So season 7's starting late next year. So there's still a chance we'll get the book before the start of the season, but it's looking less and less likely after each passing day. How long does it take, once you've announced a publishing date, to actually, print and ship? It'd be a few months, I think.
Yeah, well, I think for these books, they can probably do it quickly. I seem to remember, this is one of those anecdotal nonsense memories, but I seem to remember like when J.K. Rowling finished either the last book or one of the last books, it was printed like so unbelievably fast afterward. It was like, they were just sitting there waiting with all the machinery whirring and ready to go because, there's basically, if you just think about net present value, when you know you're going to make millions and millions of dollars selling the book, you're going to make more money if you sell it today than if you can't sell it for another month. So they're very incentivized to roll it out quickly when it's a book like this, certainly.
Yeah, that's true. We will see. We will, of course, update our loyal listeners the minute we know, because we are anxiously awaiting this just about as much as anyone else. I don't know if I was gonna reread them, but I don't know if I'm gonna do that. We'll see.
Yeah. I keep reading things that make me see all this like extra depth and then that I never saw before, and that does make me want to go back and read them. In particular, that YouTube channel that Gentry recommended before was pretty eye-opening for me. But again, like that's an enormous time investment to read all those books, so it probably is not going to happen.
And I have a stack of books on my nightstand, like a mile long right now, a mile high. Yeah. So I have a lot of other stuff I need to read.
Right. Yeah, and I've already read these books at least twice. So that's not really something I need to be doing. Yeah.
All right, moving on. The next news is, did you know Mel Gibson has a new movie coming out?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, he does. I just blanked on the name. He's directing a movie about a pacifist during World War I, who joined the military to be a medic and to help people out. And there's a lot of drama and heroics around this. He's a very strong Christian man. So it's a typical Mel Gibson movie. But because of this movie, he's back on the circuit and doing interviews again, and someone asked him about Batman versus Superman, and he called it a piece of shit.
All right.
So this is the quote that everyone's running with because it's the interesting part. But basically, he said that he was basically just digging into the blockbuster movies of today in general, he was making fun of green screen, making fun of how bloated and expensive these movies have gotten. Like he thinks it's ridiculous that a movie would cost $180 million, which I kind of agree with him on that. I think that's a lot of money. But the thing that everyone is remembering is that he insulted Batman v Superman. So that's why I reported on it, because that's hilarious. And I will take any moment.
That makes him your new favorite person.
Yeah. And then I learned that he's doing a Passion of the Christ 2. So now he's not really my favorite person. Quite. Again.
Yeah.
I don't even know how this Jesus the sequel. I guess it's the resurrection, right? Like that's the only thing you can do.
I guess, but that story doesn't seem to have as much drama as the crucifixion. But
no, it doesn't. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, that's Mel Gibson. He's also in a new movie, a VOD movie, I think. I can't remember the name. Bloodfather, I think, is the name. He's back. Somehow, inexplicably, the world has forgiven Mel Gibson for his transgressions.
It always happens eventually, because the thing is, we all love him. We're just mad at him. That's not the same thing as hating someone.
That's true. If he wasn't such an asshole, he would be one of my favorite people, but he's just terrible.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's exactly the same thing with Tom Cruise. We all deeply love Tom Cruise. People will deny this, but they do. They're just frustrated with him, and they wish that he would be better. But that doesn't mean they don't love him.
It's fair. All right, the last news item I had for this week. Jared Hess, the director of Napoleon Dynamite, has just signed on to direct the third movie in the Shanghai Noon trilogy. Those of you listening at home, and possibly you, Matt, Shanghai Noon is I think it was an early 2000s movie with Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson in it. Another buddy cop-esque movie, this time with a Western flair. There was apparently a sequel called Shanghai Nights, which I don't know if I ever saw. I did see Shanghai Noon, and it was not good. It made almost $100 million, though, so... but this is the sequel that nobody wanted, and they're making it. So, Matt, are you going to go see this movie?
No, I'm not.
So the director of famed indie movie Napoleon Dynamite is not enough to get you on board with this one?
I mean, I did really enjoy the kinetic, fast-paced action wushu fighting scenes in Napoleon Dynamite. And I thought that they were well placed and everything, but no, not seeing it, not seeing the connection there.
Do you think? Have you seen Napoleon Dynamite?
Yeah, a long time ago, but yeah.
Do you think that's? I think that's one of the most overrated indie films I've ever seen. Like,
Yeah,
it's almost like indie to an obnoxious degree, and that they just decided to make a movie that's not really about anything.
yeah. I think I didn't like it at all the first time I saw it. Like, I was just like really, really annoyed that it was popular. And then after the hype had died down, I think I watched it again, and I was like, okay, I get it. I see why people like this, but I don't see why they liked it as much as they did. Um, it wasn't fantastic. There's better indie stuff, I guess, but whatever. Whatever.
Yeah. So they're gonna make this sequel, and it's not gonna make any money, and then the studio is gonna stand there scratching their heads, like, what did we do wrong? And it's like, this is not a good idea. Nobody was asking for this film. Like,
yeah. Make like anything else with Jackie Chan, and it would make more money.
Literally anything else,
yeah. Seriously, if you made any movie and it was like starring Jackie Chan, I'd be like, oh, I love Jackie Chan. But because you've tarnished it with this, I'm like, oh, Shanghai property again?
Yay.
Yeah.
This is the second week in a row we've had Jackie Chan news on our news corner.
Oh, yeah. We love him.
It's a very exciting time for Jackie Chan.
He's a friend of the podcast.
First he gets an Oscar, and then he gets to be in Shanghai.
Yeah.
Shanghai Morning?
Shanghai. Yeah, no, I don't have anything.
All right. Let's move on to our main event then. Let's talk Edgar Wright. Matt, I love this guy. I love this guy so much.
Yeah.
I love his movies. Like, every single one of these movies is remarkable. And I couldn't believe, like, even I'll be the first to say I think Hot Fuzz is the weakest of his films. And yet I still loved every minute of this rewatch. Yes.
It's weird to me because, like I mentioned before, I don't think, like, I've always really liked these movies. I thought they were great, but I never realized how great until I sort of had the mastery of the directorial style explained to me. And then once I sort of started paying attention to that, maybe it's just because I started paying attention to directing and camera angles a lot more. But once I started paying attention to that, I realized how much he communicates with, things that are not just the characters talking, so like the montage in that particular movie, Hot Fuzz, where he's transiting from London to the small town, is like this extremely rapid cutting thing where it's showing all these just like basically flashes of imagery, and it's sort of telling this slightly amusing story with just a few like clever shots, and then he arrives there, and any other director would basically just like show him driving in his car, and then he would like get out of his car and be there. So can we talk briefly about the idea that several of his movies make up a trilogy?
Yeah. So that's I was going to move right into that, because he's only directed 4 films, and 3 of them are part of this Cornetto trilogy, so named after the ice cream that characters are eating in each one. And actually, I read that this actually started as kind of a joke. One of the characters in Shaun of the Dead uses it as like a hangover cure, because that's what Edgar Wright did. He was eat these as a cure for his hangover, and then he's like, in his next movie, Hot Fuzz, he put it in there just as like a callback to his previous movie, which he does constantly. And someone was like, "Oh, you're making a trilogy?" So he's like, "Oh yeah, it's the Cornetto ice cream trilogy." So it was, I think it was both semi-planned and semi-unplanned. But I think you're absolutely right that there's a thematic through line through all 3 of those movies.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to definitely bring that up now, because as we go through the movies, there are certain things where I may even just hold off discussing them until the end, because it's such a strong motif across all of his work that it's worth sort of discussing in context of all the movies and how it appears in all the movies. But yeah, it's really fascinating to me when a director kind of has the same vision across lots of different things, and you can see how he expresses it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to build on your earlier point, talking about, you know, how he uses his direction style and the camera to tell stories. You know, there's that, I think we've talked about several times on here, but that Every Frame a Painting series, where it talks about his skill with comedy, and the basic summation is he uses every tool at his disposal as a filmmaker to tell a joke. I mean, he uses camera movements, he uses edits, he uses dialogue, he uses everything. He uses music. Every tool that's at his disposal is used, and which makes for varying comedy that's not just this person says a funny joke and we all laugh, which is a lot of comedy these days. I mean, I love Seth Rogen and the Judd Apatow group of comedians, but their comedy is very dialogue heavy, and it's very focused on just dialogue. And I think the thing that happens is you watch those movies one time and you hear all the jokes and you laugh, and then they really aren't rewatchable. But I think because of all the different methods in which Edgar Wright in these films is using to tell jokes, you learn something new every time you watch it, and you see different jokes every time you watch it because it's so cleverly done.
Yeah. I mean, and especially in terms of rewatches, because it's so, like, he's the most foreshadowingist person in the world. Like every film, at least the Cornetto trilogy films, are just totally rife with foreshadowing. Almost everything characters say in the first act is, you know, can be read as foreshadowing of some kind. Like it's so pervasive, and it's like it's fun the first time, even though you don't really notice it consciously, and then the second time you're like, oh, I see what you did there. So there's all these little Easter eggs for you to each time you watch it again.
Yeah, and that's just to me, that's just smart, fun filmmaking. Is like it's good structure, like, and it's talented writing to be able to lay in all these hints towards future stuff without making them so obvious that everyone picks up on it the first time, but obvious enough to where if you're paying attention on a second viewing, you definitely pick up on it.
Right.
So that's like a talented, like, line to skirt, and he does it well, like in every single one of these movies. So why don't we go ahead and jump into Shaun of the Dead? We've been kind of talking about them generally, but let's get into this film. So I think at the end of this thing, I'm going to ask you to rank these movies, and I don't know how hard of a decision that's going to be for you. I go back and forth at this one. I love this film so much. I think, you know, Edgar Wright is a huge zombie movie guy. Like, he loves the genre. He loves Romero. Like, he and you can kind of tell in this movie, like, he's very much doing an examination of the zombie film in Shaun of the Dead, but not he's definitely not like insulting it or making fun of it. He's just using the genre tropes and inverting them in interesting ways. Yeah,
it's funny because it is a very effective zombie movie while being a comedy.
Right.
He's doing everything correctly. Like, you know, I don't know. I'm just thinking of like the scene where somebody goes and turns on a light, and, you know, or opens a window or whatever it is, and there's just like tons of zombies right there. And it's like, yeah, you've seen that in like every zombie movie, and the way it's placed in this movie is very effective. But the point of this movie is not to scare you; it's to amuse you. But I think he uses them very creatively, and of course they're also a metaphor. Zombies are always a metaphor in any movie they show up in, but in this movie especially, they're sort of a metaphor for this force that makes everything the same, force that incorporates everything and makes it uniform.
Yeah, which is
we're going to see again.
Yeah, we're going to see again and again and again. Yeah, and the thing I really like, and we're going to talk about how brilliant Edgar Wright layers these different plot lines. I mean, this is on the surface a zombie movie, but it's also a relationship drama where the real main plot is between Simon Pegg's character of Shaun and his girlfriend, who break up the night before the zombie outbreak breaks out, and it is basically their relationship and examining their relationship through an apocalypse and how it kind of destroys the people around them.
Yeah,
like,
right.
It's like there's so many. Every time I watch these movies, I have another thought and think about it, and like, well, what is their relationship ending in a zombie apocalypse? Like at the end of this movie, all their friends are dead. The apocalypse is thwarted, but these two people are now together. But everyone that was around them, their entire group of friends and family, are now dead. So what does that say about these two people's relationship? Like it's kind of seen they're coming together as a victory, but also in the background you're like, isn't this kind of bad that their relationship was so toxic and self-centered that everyone around them died?
Right. I mean, yeah, it's never too explicit with metaphors. Like you can't just say like, oh, what it's saying is that their being together basically caused them to push everyone else away. Although that's certainly a valid reading and it's interesting, and you can argue about it and discuss it. But yeah, like it's that's another motif is how there's usually some very mundane interpersonal situation that is through his films sort of blown up into enormous world-ending stakes, and the resolution of the world-ending stakes is the same as the resolution of the interpersonal conflict, which is in this movie, as you said, they can't really. I guess they're saved by Deus Ex Machina in this movie, basically, because don't the soldiers just show up at the last minute?
Yeah.
So it's not exactly like they did anything, but they certainly did make sure all their friends were dead first.
Yeah. I mean, all their friends basically more or less sacrificed themselves. I mean, Nick Frost's character definitely sacrifices himself for their relationship, basically. Which there's this whole kind of line of conflict in this movie is Shaun is best friends with Nick Frost's character, who is basically holding him back. He's kind of a bum. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't do anything, and he's keeping Shaun from realizing his full potential, and he's kind of tanking their relationship. And of course, the movie ends. The only reason their relationship survives is because Simon Pegg is able to remove himself from his friend by literally leaving him to die. But then the movie kind of circumvents that at the end with Nick Frost's character is locked up in the shed in the back as a zombie, and he still pops back there every so often to play video games with him, which was something that was forecast in the beginning of the movie when the other roommate, Pete, tells him, if you're going to live like an animal, go live in the shed, which is another thing
Right.
that Edgar Wright does. That's the forecasting. But yeah, I mean, like, you're right. These are... It's so funny because, I mean, this is a movie that's basically making a comedy out of the zombie trope, and it could just simply be that, but it's so much more things than that. There's so much going on here, and I think maybe that's why people underestimate or underrate Edgar Wright, is because they see the movie at that very surface level, and they don't really dive deep into it. I mean, but every time I see this movie, I pull something else away from it.
Yeah, and also when you're watching them, you're not usually in that mentality of like, okay, I'm going to analyze this. You're just like, oh, it's a British comedy,
right?
How delightful, and really, like, if you do catch the other stuff, it's because you've watched it a couple times and just noticed it, because you're like, you know what's going to happen plot wise, and so you're free to pay attention to other things, or someone's explained it to you, which is what's happened in my case.
Right. I mean, just think about how complicated the Shaun character in this story is. I mean, he's a guy who's, I think, did his father die, or did they just split? Did his father abandon him? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember that detail.
But basically, she remarries, and Shaun has never fully dealt with this new man in his life, even though he's basically the one that raised him. Like, we see the joke over and over again where anytime someone mentions him, he says, "Oh, he's not my father." And so he's a man who has abandonment issues in his family. Like, he likes his mom, but he doesn't visit his mom very often. So obviously he has issues with his romantic relationships as well. And it is only through his father's death, his not real father, but that he learns to kind of grow up. And it's like, look, this is a really complicated character in the middle of this British comedy about zombies.
Yeah.
And he goes through a lot of change in this movie.
Yeah, and really all of even like the secondary characters have their own, correctly created and paced out plot, with their own what they've got going on with their lives and their own resolution, and when they die, you actually care, and that's always impressive to me.
Yeah, there's this whole subplot with her roommates, with Liz's roommates Diane and David, about how David really has loved Liz the whole time, but he's been dating Diane, and there's this whole interplay between those characters and their complicated interactions, and everything obviously falls back on the Shaun-Liz relationship, because that's I think the core of the movie, what the movie is about. But you're right, everyone has their own little thing, and the end of this movie, like everything once they get to the Winchester is so great. Like the Queen playing while they're fighting the zombies, the gun, the Winchester rifle actually working. Like there's all this setup throughout the entire movie for this one moment, and it just pays off. Like everything that happens in that bar at that scene was set up in the beginning of the movie in some clever way or not. And that's, like we said, that's just really good writing, and it's really funny. I think this is probably the funniest of the four, if I'm being honest. This is the one I laugh the most at on rewatches, at least.
I think you're right, yeah, because that's one thing I noticed this time, was that as funny as these are, mostly I'm just sort of like smirking rather than laughing out loud. But I think Shaun of the Dead has the most real laugh out loud moments. It also gets to lean on that like gore humor, right, which the other ones sort of do here and there, but not as much.
So what are the setups in this movie? Can we remember them? I'm gonna try. I know there's a point at the night before all the zombie stuff breaks out that Ed says to Shaun, "You know what we need to do tomorrow? Just keep drinking. Like wake up, have Bloody Marys," and then the first zombie they see is a woman named Mary who they bloody up, and then they basically, his conversation of what they should do the next day leads them through their day, basically. So that's foreshadowed. Trying to think of what else.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to help you too much here. This is the one that I've gone the longest without seeing, because I don't own it. I own Hot Fuzz, and I just watched the other one on Netflix, but yeah, that's
fine. Let's move on to Hot Fuzz. So Hot Fuzz came out in 2007, so 3 years after Shaun of the Dead. While Shaun of the Dead was a inversion of the zombie genre, Hot Fuzz was clearly an exploration of the buddy cop police action movie genre. It's funny because we just talked about that Loose Cannon movie a few weeks ago that I think tried to do a similar thing, like exploring and making jokes out of this genre, and completely failed. Whereas this movie, I think, succeeds so triumphantly at the same thing. I like I said, I thought this was probably the weakest of his movies, but I really, really enjoyed it on this rewatch.
Yeah, I really like this one, and maybe because I've watched it probably the most number of times, which means I probably caught the most things about it. And this one definitely does the setups and the referential humor, things like that. And this one does have a lot of the violent humor too. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that's another motif. So while we're counting off motifs, we can add gore humor, because there's the horrifically mangled bodies after the car accident, and people being stabbed by the murderer with scissors and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and there's something to that there's a lot of gore in this movie. You're absolutely right, but the gore is like very horror movie focused with the murders, and once we kind of switch into the action movie tropes at the end of in the third act, when they basically walk into town and he's literally on a horse with guns all over him, we switch into the action movie, and basically all the violence goes away. As many bullets as they fire, there's no real blood. Nothing really, like, no one dies. Like, none of the, in that entire shootout they had at the final act of the film, no one actually dies from that, except I guess the one guy, when the entire police precinct blows up because of the mine, I think he's the only one that actually dies. But, like,
I think so, yeah.
And I think that's commentary on, police violence and what have you, in that if the police are doing their jobs, they shouldn't actually be killing people to defend the town. So it's an interesting commentary on that. But this movie, to get back to your previous thought on Shaun of the Dead, is again a movie about conformity. In this one, it's what is the greater good and what is worth the greater good. Is this small town that Simon Pegg's character is sent to is called the safest town in all of England. They haven't had murders in forever. They don't have crime. They're perfectly safe. They're the village of the year every year. And we learn throughout the course of the movie this is because they happily murder people. Instead of reporting a crime, they'll just kill the person, so they won't have any statistics. And it's all for the greater good. And that's the line. The joke in that one is every time someone says the greater good, Wright likes repeat humor a lot, like people repeating lines. He does that a lot of his movies, and I think it's used really well here. So someone says the greater good, and they repeat in unison the greater good. So what do you think? What is your take on the examination of that in this film?
So I think the idea of the greater good and the theme of the greater good, it's obviously, the big theme of this movie, and it's in his other movies too, to some degree. This idea that it's basically totalitarianism, isn't it? I mean, isn't that sort of the nature of everything will be fine if we, we'll have order and peace, and the cost of that is simply your humanity, which is what's happening in this movie. That the town council or the town elders or whatever, they're like, look, we're going to win the village competition, which basically means that they're like an exemplary little fascist town, which is ironic that the woman calls him a fascist. And the only cost is we just have to kill anyone who's deviant from our vision of what that constitutes. And I wonder, it is interesting because it plays a certain way because it's in England, which had much more sort of direct struggles with the types of political philosophy, or whatever term you want to use, that actually seriously suggests that as a course of action, kill everyone who doesn't agree with us, and then our society will be perfect.
Right.
And it obviously it's meant to be comedic in this movie, but it's like, yeah, this isn't too far off from what some groups of people actually tried to do.
Well, and I think the cool thing about the movie is that it takes that to its logical end, which is just that these people kind of lose it and just start killing anyone. Like, I'm sure this started off as very reasonable, as we are going to ruthlessly punish anyone who breaks the law, and then kind of devolved into, the living statue man has to die because he has the audacity to just exist. And right. Then I think some of the kids that do graffiti, they kill them. One of the kids that peed outside, they kill that kid. And it just, and then with the member of their own council, who her only crime was literally just, I want to leave the town and move to another town. And so they killed her because no one else can have them. So it is clever and it is funny, but it also, takes this, with a note of seriousness, takes this to its logical conclusion, which is that these people just kind of go mad with power and just start doing things willy-nilly. Like, all the deaths, and that's the smart part of this movie is Simon Pegg's character, Angel, I think is Sergeant Angel, comes up with this really complicated, convoluted conspiracy that made good reason and motive out of all of these deaths. And in
Right.
the end, it's not that at all. It's literally he was bad at Shakespeare. She had an annoying laugh. He made typos in the newspaper, and it's stuff as stupid as that. And I think that's very clever in how it does that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's the surprising amount of the humor in this movie does come from things like that, where it's not a joke at all. Like there's not really any point where you laugh. You're just like, this is so delightfully absurd. How do you think of this?
Right.
And yeah, it's just so like entertaining, just because and also I think it helps in this movie that you have Simon Pegg playing probably is kind of a unique character for him, because he's playing a straight man. Normally he's playing the guy who gets to be wacky,
right,
and uses his face and flail his arms around. And in this movie he's playing the straight man, and so most of his, like, he's actually able to draw laughs out of you just with his like smoldering like glare at how ridiculous everything is. Which works just as well somehow.
Yeah. I think we'll get into it more in The World's End, but I think Simon Pegg is also severely underrated in his acting talents. I think he's very, very skilled at acting, and The World's End is a performance that, you know, if I was giving out Oscars, I would give one to him in what he does in that, but we'll get to it. But yeah, you're right. Here he plays a role he's not very used to, but he plays it really well. And it's funny because part of the joke on this whole buddy cop thing is Simon Pegg is not the person that looks like your typical super cop, right? He's not like super built. I mean, he's a relatively normal looking person, so it's kind of playing off that. It's subverting your expectations to a certain extent with that.
Yeah, and also just that his character is like what an actually really good cop would be. Like, one time he gets to hold a machine gun in his career. Most of the time he's actually just like, you know, writing parking tickets. And
well, and I think the scenes I like the most are the really dramatic, like lots of sound effects and hard cross cuts to them filling out paperwork.
Yeah.
And like that's hilarious. And I mean, that's true. That's like, he makes a comment after they watch Bad Boys 2 where he's like, I think that much recklessness would just cause a lot of paperwork. And I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, that's most of what police officers do on a given day is file reports and fill out case files, and that it's not glamorous work a lot of the times. And I love how it uses the typical action cuts to show that in just filling out paperwork.
Yeah. Speaking of the action cuts, like the chase where he's just chasing the shoplifter is just like such an fun and engaging sequence. And like, it just shows you that like you don't need to have like, oh my god, he's got the nuclear bomb in his briefcase, and he's driving the Maserati on the freeway, and he's flipping cars off of a car carrier. It's like, no, you can really have like, if you know what you're doing with the direction and the characters and everything, you can have a super like fun and exciting chase that's on foot.
Yeah, and Wright is really good at shooting action. Like, every single one of these movies has action in it, and he shoots it very well. And I mean, even when he gets into emulating, like the third act of this movie switches to basically a parody of Bad Boys 2. Which is very meta because it's the film they're watching within the movie. But there's a scene, I don't know if you caught it, but there's a scene when like the camera starts spinning around the two characters like it does in Bad Boys 2. Like, and it's like he's copying Bay's camera style in a lot of these shots, and he's doing it really well. I mean, tons of people try to copy Michael Bay and make Michael Bay-esque action movies, like serious action movies, and they can't pull it off. And here he's doing it for comedic effect and he does a really good job at it and makes it funny at the same time. So that shows real skill.
Yeah. Also, got to mention the Point Break firing, screaming whilst firing a gun in the air.
Well, that was all set up, right? Like, when Danny meets Angel for the first time, he says, "Have you ever jumped while firing two guns? Jumped in the air while firing two guns? Have you ever jumped in the air whilst firing one gun? Have you ever been involved in a high-speed car chase while firing a gun? Have you ever shot your guns in the air while screaming? And throughout the film, every single one of those things is done.
Right.
And that's back to the Edgar Wright setup joke. And that's the kind of thing where I probably didn't catch that the first time around. In fact, I can almost guarantee that that joke works on its own just because he's pummeling him with questions and Simon Pegg is annoyed. So that's funny on its own. And then when you watch it again, you say, oh wait, that's setting up something that pays off later in the movie. And then it becomes a whole new level of funny when you watch it again.
Yeah. And they make sure to show that scene in Point Break in the movie so that you get the reference.
Right.
And then that's just another level, like where you might have gotten the Point Break reference when he said it the first time, but now you definitely do. And also you've been reminded of it on a subtle level so that you're ready to see it later and get that connection. And this is all happening so fast. Like that's one thing in general is like all these things that are happening is like sometimes they're happening. The camera is just showing them while other characters are talking about something else. And it's just very quick and it's almost throwaway, but it's all like seeping into your subconscious or your conscious if you're paying attention at that level. It's just very, very dense filmmaking. Oh yeah, absolutely. The other thing I like a lot in this film is the leaving the frame jokes. Wright employs in this a lot. Like Nick Frost's Danny character at one point like is mad at him and he says something to the effect of he says something mean to Simon Pegg and then runs away, and normally like he would just run out of frame and they would be done with it, but instead the camera holds on him, so we see him like slowly running all the way up to his door, which is like 30 feet away, and the camera just holds on that moment for way too long. It's hilarious. Yeah. And then there's another scene in the movie where the two detectives are making fun of him and they both like come in and out of the frame multiple times to sound effects, and it's just so funny. It's just like how he uses exiting and entering the frame is great. Like there's a scene when like a cake appears in the frame right next to Angel's head. Like it's like he's so good at this stuff. Like he really is. Yeah. Oh, and for some reason that reminded me, like, I tend to watch a lot of movies with subtitles on because we have little kids, so that we want something like quiet, you know. And that causes me to notice a lot of things that I never noticed. Like, no matter some movies, I'll notice things that I've watched the movie 100 times and I never noticed it until the subtitles were on. But in these movies, like the female police officer and the really old guy with the thick accent, they're always saying pretty hilarious things that no one else responds to, and so you don't necessarily notice them. But that's just another way in which these scenes are really dense. Yeah. Something I noticed. She's always. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Well, she's always just saying like really over the top sexual innuendo, and I don't remember his thing, but he says pretty funny things too. Yeah, I caught this time around. When it's Danny's birthday near the end of the movie and they come out with a cake, she's the one holding the cake, and she's also just wearing like something over her shirt that's just boobs. She's just wearing a thing that's just breasts, and that's like she's like the most over the top characterized female character, and that's making fun of how these cop movies treat the female police officers, and it's doing it in clever ways, and it's really funny. And then like the 3-beat on that joke is at the end of the movie, Simon Pegg's character is making the same jokes as everyone else in the police station. Right. He's making the sexist jokes against her too, which I don't know if we're saying that's a good thing or not, but. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he does, like, part of his arc is that he actually, like, becomes less serious and that thus becomes more of an action movie cop. Yeah. Yeah. Which is funny, and it works on a comedic level. I've never asked what it's doing on a, like, analytic level. Yeah. I think his journey is learning to switch off, right? So yeah, like I think that's played as a good thing, that he doesn't always have to be the super serious cop. He can still be good at his job without being
my life is completely dedicated to this one
Yeah.
thing. But again, there's so much like emotional stuff going on in this movie on top of all the funny stuff. Like his story about his police car pedal cart is really hilarious, but it's also kind of tragic that his uncle gave him this pedal cart, and that's when he first like got the taste of law and order, and then found out that he bought the pedal cart selling drugs, and then as a little kid refused to ride it anymore because someone broke the law to do this. And I mean, that's like that's emotional stuff. And then Danny's whole arc with his father and the death of his mother and how both characters are handling that, and like that's like heavy dramatic stuff mixed in with this action comedy.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the relationship at the heart of this movie is probably sort of the like adorable bromance between Angel and Danny.
Yeah.
Because obviously Danny idolizes him as like a real cop at first and wants to be like him, and Angel is annoyed at first, but then realizes that he has something to learn from him, and they become partners and friends, and it's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I was gonna say at first I was like I can't figure out what the core relationship here is, because I was looking for a male-female relationship, but really this is strictly it. And actually there's some of the comedy is from how almost like romantic their dialogue is at times, where they're like, you just can't switch off that noggin, and then he's like, I don't know how. And it's intentionally like dialogue you would see between a man and a woman.
Yeah, it's kind of romantic in design. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Fun fact, the DVD collection of Danny's that you see in the movie when he pulls out Bad Boys 2 and Point Break is actually Edgar Wright's DVD collection.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I love this movie very much. I'm so surprised by this one, because I guess always in the back of my head I'm like, oh, this is the weakest of the trilogy. So I kind of forget that means it's still very good. But so whenever I watch it, I'm always kind of surprised. I was like, oh wow, this is a really good film, because I just put not as good in the back of my head and forget that not as good for Edgar Wright is still great.
Yeah. I don't see it as the worst in the trilogy, but I that's fine. I love this movie, definitely. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Before we conclude the Cornetto trilogy, I wanted to go in order, in some semblance of order, of when the movies came out. So the next on the list is the only movie he's directed that was not also written by Simon Pegg is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. This is an adaptation of the comic book series by Brian Lee O'Malley, I think it is. It was written by Michael Bacall as well, but I think there's some conversations about how much of what's in the final script is actually Michael Bacall's, or if he wrote a script and then Edgar Wright got his hands on it and rewrote most of it, but there was enough in there where he still gets a screenplay by credit. But you can tell that this movie has Edgar Wright all over it in the writing, not just the directing. This is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is difficult to explain. It is basically a love letter to like video games and kind of 8-bit. It's also a love letter to like kind of nerdy outcast kids. It's
like punk rock or whatever.
Yeah. It's like
is it punk rock or what? I don't even know.
I guess. I'm not sure. I love this movie so much. It's like it was created for me almost. Like every part of this movie, like from the opening screen, which is like an 8-bit version of the Universal song, like every part of this movie is just like designed to make me happy. And I really, really like it. I'm not so devoid of objective thoughts that I can't see the problems in it, because I think there are some problems in this film. We'll probably get to that, but I love all these characters. I love the interaction. I love how Wright shoots a film to make it look as close to like what a comic would look like, because it uses a lot of comic devices, and it borrows a lot of devices from the books themselves, because I have read some of them, to show like panels in a comic book. And it's really inventive. It's really creative. It didn't do very well in theaters, but it's kind of got this cult status now, and I'm very happy about that. What is your overall opinion on Scott Pilgrim?
Yeah, I think this is one that I didn't see at first because it just didn't like seem like it was for me based on how it was advertised. I was kind of like, this must be for younger people for some reason. I guess because it was Michael Cera,
That's fair.
who's probably older than me actually. But anyway, um, but I when I finally got around to seeing it, I was like once again like pretty quickly sucked in. It's extremely well made. It looks really great. I was thinking prior to this podcast about how we now have a few examples of directors who've sort of tried to make like comic book movies that looked that were very stylized, and like we had the horrible Ang Lee Hulk movie where they actually had panels on the screen, and then we had the superior Sin City movie where they tried to make everything look almost exactly the way it was drawn. And I think this movie maybe you'll push back on this, but I think this is like the best in that category in terms of making not just trying to make the screen look the way the panel looks, but like making the movie look like something between a video game and a comic book, and seamlessly interweaving sort of the fantastical elements with the real things and the actors in a way where you're not just rolling your eyes at the green screen. You're pretty swept up in how everything looks, and it's just really well composed. And I guess what I'm saying is this movie. What was striking to me about this movie, and admittedly I've only seen it once, was the visual grandeur of it.
Absolutely, yeah, and I would agree with that sentiment 100%. That this movie, you can tell Wright set out to achieve a very specific look, and he wanted to differ from the comics in a certain way, but he wanted to achieve a similar look to them, and I think he's fully succeeded. I mean, there's stuff that he took right out, like I think I don't know if you remember the view inside of Scott Pilgrim's head, where the meter moves from doesn't get it to gets it. That's taken straight out of the book, but there's so many like subtle touches here. Like I think this is the first script probably where Edgar Wright was kind of penned in, because he had a basic story to work off of. But it's kind of amazing to me, while he didn't write the basics behind the story, it fits very much into what he likes to do. I mean, this is a movie where Scott Pilgrim fights off Ramona's 7 evil boyfriends, exes, and obviously the exes are just a metaphor for your past and how it controls you, and how someone's past defines them, and how you have to be able to overcome that. And that seems to me a very Edgar Wright-ish theme.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it's taking what is a very mundane interpersonal struggle of like getting over the fact that your squeeze had exes, and blowing that up into apocalyptic stakes where you have to actually like battle them, and digging into what that actually means, not on the metaphorical level too, and making you therefore feel kind of what you're supposed to be feeling, as if it were just some drama about relationships.
Right. And again, Scott Pilgrim is a very complicated character. He starts off the movie dating a 17-year-old girl because he got dumped a year ago and is clearly still not over it. He latches onto this girl, not because, I think at first, because he doesn't really have any feelings for her at all, but he just wants attention and he's lonely. And then he finds Ramona and he latches onto her because he's like, she's like the first girl that's very interesting to him, and they actually I think one of the videos I watched, and I don't want to take credit for this thought, but um, said that they make a lot of the same bad choices, and you can kind of see that evident in the fact that both of their exes are in a famous band now that happen to be in the same band as each other. But you can like their lives kind of echo each other, and that's probably why they were kind of drawn to each other in this relationship. But it's very complicated and nuanced, and how he interacts with Knives, his 17-year-old girlfriend, and then how he and Ramona's relationship works. But again, it does all this while still at its core just having some really, really funny and well done visual and cinematic gags throughout the entire film.
Yeah. Right. Like I think my favorite, or at least maybe not my favorite, but the one that jumps to mind immediately is that like he at the end he's basically like defeated and killed by the final boss, and he kind of like goes around and that's like the moment he has his character catharsis.
Yeah.
And he apologizes, like he grows up basically, and he apologizes to the people who he needs to apologize to, because he's like pretty flawed, and he realizes it at this point, and he apologizes to them, and then he like, you might have to correct me here, but he like levels up or he gets like a power up, and he gets one more life, in the form of like, a little orb or whatever, and then he's able to come back and do everything correctly.
Yeah. So basically he earns a power up because he says he's in love with Ramona, and then he fights the final boss and loses, but he has a one up from earlier in the film, and then he comes back and says that he wants to fight the guy not for Ramona but for himself, and that's when he earns the power of self-respect and levels up even more than he had before. And yeah, that's that whole thing.
Okay, so apparently I got it all wrong.
No, you got the details right.
It's just
it's just the nuance of it.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's so clever, and I mean, it's like this is very video gamey without like being too over the top with it. But like there's like, for people that play, like there's Zelda music throughout this whole thing, like constantly almost. And it's kind of set up as young Neil is playing Zelda on his Game Boy, so when the sound effects come in that just happen to match what's going on screen, it makes sense within the context of the world. But I love how seriously they take the conceit of like these people randomly just start fighting, and Scott Pilgrim, this guy who's really not good at anything, is suddenly really good at martial arts and fighting people. And it's like, I think there's scenes when Anna Kendrick is just watching it happen, and she's kind of like looking ridiculous, that I think she's supposed to be the audience surrogate after the first fight, where it's like, wait, what the hell's going on? But the movie just takes all this stuff seriously, and it plays it. I mean, it's a joke, but also the fights are filmed like animes or like video game fights.
Yeah.
Like there's even a part, I think it's when he's fighting the vegan. Like there's always dust on the ground during like anime fights, so they just put a bunch of plastic cups on the ground that, like, as characters are powering up, like the wind from their power levels rising is pushing the cups around like dust in an anime. It's just really, really clever little visual tricks that they do to really cement the look they're going for.
Yeah, and I mean, in a certain way, he has experience with this type of thing, because in the first movie, you can make fun of everything, but don't make fun of the zombies as like, oh, can you believe it's zombies? Like, take seriously the conceit that there are zombies in Shaun of the Dead, and then the jokes proceed from there. Take seriously the conceit that the village council is murdering everyone, and then the jokes are based on that. And similar here, it's like you don't have an actor look at the camera and go, wasn't this ridiculous that we're doing this anime thing? That is the foundation, and then you can play within that. I think I don't know if that quite makes sense, but he's very good at bringing you into his like world, which has its own rules, and then letting the drama and the jokes and everything play within that rule-based world.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I call that the Buffy the Vampire Slayer principle. That's my name for it, because I think
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's just because I love that show and I'll relate anything to it and I'll take any opportunity I can to talk about it, which is right now. But
All right.
but yeah, basically, Buffy the Vampire Slayer works because they take the core conceit. 16-year-old girl has superpowers and can fight demons. They take that seriously, and then all the drama and the jokes build off of that serious conceit. And that's absolutely what happens here, and that's why this movie works, and it wouldn't be able to work without that.
Yeah.
All right, that's Scott Pilgrim. I want to go ahead and move on to the final film because I think we're going to wrap up the Cornetto trilogy with this, and this is also, I think, one of the most complicated movies I've ever seen. We're talking, of course, about The World's End, which came out in 2013, also written by Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, as usual. Matt, this movie, you saw this for the first time very recently, right?
Yeah, a couple nights ago, actually.
This movie's so good.
So,
this is such a good film.
Yeah, this was one that I'd heard about for some time and sort of been confused because I was like, I never even heard of this movie at all. Like, when did this even come out? And it's a really weird movie in that, like, and I'm hardly the first person to point this out, but, you know, if we're looking just at the Cornetto trilogy, the first movie is a spoof on zombies. The second one is a spoof on cop action movies, buddy cop action movies. This one is not really riffing on anything in particular.
No.
But what it does do is it really doubles down on a lot of the themes that you see in the other movies. And I think at this point, I'm going to start mentioning how these are, like, thematically across all the movies.
Yeah, no, go for it.
There's and even motifs like the fact that all these movies center around pubs to a large degree. Like, there's English pubs. This feature hugely in all three movies. This one is about, I guess I'll briefly summarize it because we haven't done that yet.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is facing a crisis, which at the beginning is not really specified, and he decides he's going to get all of his old, I suppose, high school friends back together to go for one more pub crawl in their hometown. And he was always their fearless leader. And you know, led them into all kinds of mischief, but there was some kind of terrible falling out between them, and of course, you know, thus the mundane human drama of this film is the relationship between these former high school friends, in particular, Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, as usual. And then the metaphor, and then of course he's a huge alcoholic. And that's really why he wants to go in the subcrawl. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but I'm sure Scott can help me clarify that in a minute. And then, of course, the metaphor is that they get into their hometown and they realize that everyone has been replaced by androids, or by robots.
No, they're not robots. Robot means slave.
Right. Robot means slave. Yeah, that's one of the jokes is they object to that because they're not slaves. They're free to do what they want, and they just happen to want to do everything that their, you know, higher ups want them to do.
Yeah.
And once again we have the theme of conformity, and, you know, basically everything will be fine. We'll have peace and stability as long as we eliminate all the undesirable elements, which is what the aliens do, or the force, whatever it is. And of course the stakes explode to be the end of the whole world. So
literally the world's end.
Yeah. I was impressed by Simon Pegg's character in this one, because not that he wasn't like a real character in all of his movies, but this one he just seems so like crazy and raw. It seems like a very raw performance, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Because he's basically playing this alcoholic who's extremely, like, at this extremely desperate point in his life, but he's putting on a facade of being like the cool guy. And so you see Simon Pegg sort of shifting between these 2 points throughout his performance, where he's being the convincing cool guy, and then at certain points the mask sort of slips. And there's a whole article about his performance, actually, or at least with a a lot of focus on his performance. But I think I would have noticed how amazing it was even without reading that, because there's just like his face is so crazy in this movie. Like it's just like you can't stop looking at his face. I don't know if you feel that way.
No, I do, and that's what I meant by Oscar-worthy performances. I think you're absolutely right in that the real measure of a good actor is not just pretending like you're the person. It's getting so into the emotional reality of that person that you can play a person putting on a front for other people convincingly. Like when you can do that as an actor, then you are really good at your job. And Simon Pegg had to do that here. I mean, this wouldn't have worked if you didn't see that if you couldn't tell that he's putting on this cool guy attitude as a front to hide his real problems and to push away people from discovering the real issues he has. If you couldn't see that, then none of this would work. So this movie completely relies on Simon Pegg's acting skills to get across the points that they're trying to sell us. And he succeeds, like, triumphantly. He's so good in this movie. It's incredible. Like, I want this guy to be leads in more movies. I feel like Edgar Wright's really the only one that puts him as his lead. Like, he plays, like, a secondary and tertiary characters a lot in films. But no one really trusts him with lead roles, and I wish they would.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thankful that he gets even these, because they're very awesome. I think also the ending of this movie is one of the more interesting explorations of this theme that we keep seeing over and over, because basically the alien force or whatever it is saying like, yeah, we just want to, we want to bring humanity into the fold of the galactic civilizations. We just need to kind of smooth off your edges a little bit. And all the surviving childhood friends who are outrageously drunk at this point, because they've had at least like 12 pints of beer, more in some cases, are like basically their whole bullet point summary is humanity doesn't like being told what to do. Get out of here. And the aliens leave, removing all their technology and thus destroying the world. And it's like, this is a metaphor for the intervention that needs to be done on Simon Pegg. And he's saying, I don't like being told what to do. Get out of here. And it destroys his life, and it destroys the whole world.
It's like I'm honestly, this movie was 3 years ago, and I'm still trying to unpack this ending fully, because on the one hand you have Simon Pegg is a raging alcoholic. Like the world is literally ending around him. His friends are dying, and he can't stop. Like even at the very end, when he and Nick Frost have it out, and it's finally revealed that he had attempted to kill himself, and that's why his arms are wrapped up, and that's the thing that led to all this, is he was in the hospital and couldn't stand it anymore and needed to find some new enablers. But this intervention needs to happen. Like, it needs to happen. He is sick, he needs help. But then the movie kind of plays it as it's a good thing that he's telling the aliens to screw off, basically. Because they're preaching conformity to a point that it destroys all character in people. So,
it's really weird, because the last shot of the movie is him walking into a pub flanked by more of the androids, who you get the sense are basically just his like slaves. Or more specifically, they're just his enablers. Like, he's just found some androids to be his enablers to go to march around with him,
right?
And be his like buddies, but they're fake. Like, they're fake people. That it's the most explicit representation of like of what Nick Frost said earlier. Like, we're not your friends. We're just your enablers. It's like, oh well, he found some new ones, and he's going to keep doing what he was doing, and he's about to get into a brawl. And it's like he hasn't changed at all, hasn't learned anything, brought down the whole world with him in his bender. And you're right that you're not clear exactly what you're supposed to feel about this, because like you said, it's like, yeah, we obviously don't want the aliens to kill everyone and replace them with robots, but it's also not cool that the aliens destroyed all of our technology and left us in the dark age. So I'm not sure exactly what the movie wants us to feel here.
It's not cool that this man's alcoholism literally brought about the end of the world. And he apparently has learned nothing. And that's the thing, is I don't know if he's learned nothing, because he comes in and he orders 5 tap waters, right? And that's a callback to the joke earlier in the movie where Nick Frost's character is saying, you know how much guts and balls it takes to walk into a bar filled with angry men and order tap water. So is that him saying he is no longer an alcoholic and just moved on to another form of addiction, which is him just going and picking fights with these people? Like, I don't know how to read that.
Yeah.
Like, I think on the one hand, it's clear that he's learned nothing and is just going to continue living and doing whatever he wants. He never wanted to be told what to do. And that's, like, even though the world ends, basically every character in this movie moves back to what they were doing before, right? Like, all of our except for except for the one guy who finally gets the girl. I can't remember his character's name, but he finally gets to be with the girl. But the Martin Freeman's character goes right back to selling real estate. Pete goes right back to being with his family, so much so that they don't even notice he's a robot now.
Right.
Like, everyone, like, the status quo of our characters basically remains the same, even though the world around them has been destroyed. So it's it's a complicated ending.
Yeah, it's really, I'm struggling right now to get any sense, because again, the world would have actually been destroyed either way. The world would have been destroyed if the aliens had completed their plan, which was basically going to kill like 99.5% of all people and replace them with robots. And the only people who survived, the joke is, the only people who survived are like either insanely paranoid people or people who were so bland that they just went along with the aliens' plan and thought it was great. Sorry, that's like my favorite part, was the two guys in the whole town who were just okay with it at the end, and they're like, "Oh, thanks a lot." When he kicks the aliens out. And
then you can even read further into it with the fact that the blanks come back to life after a week, and what that's saying. Like, there's so much stuff to unpack about this film. It's so layered. It's so I mean, like we talked about at the beginning. On the one hand, this is a story about how when you go back home to your childhood home, like, you know you've changed, but everything else seems like it's exactly the same. And then it's talking about alcoholism, and then it's talking about how, in Gary King's case, he didn't really change at all. Like, it specifically points that out, in that, like, he was so afraid of changing from that person that, like, he obsessively didn't, like, he has the same exact car, and there's that scene, and not only is it has the same exact car, but it's clear that he spent a lot of time and money. Like, he's basically replaced every single part of this car, and he, like, lists all the parts he had to replace just to keep the same car, when it doesn't, like, he's obsessed with staying that exact same person. So I guess his victory in the end is at least accepting and moving on from that past image of himself, and that's shown literally when he rips the head off the young robot version of himself. So that's his success. But how does that tie in to him overcoming alcoholism, or if he does, or any of that? And I don't think it does, unless the argument is the alcoholism was rooted into just his obsession with the past. And I don't know, like this, like my confusion with this, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's just it's meant to be kind of an ambiguous, like, you have to draw your own conclusion type ending.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the most complicated of the trilogy, and therefore the hardest to unravel. It doesn't like, I feel like the other movies hand you the resolution a bit more tidily than this one does. Whereas, like, even I don't know if I should use the term unreliable narrator, but the ending is narrated by Nick Frost's character,
right?
And for some reason, what really, like, jumped out at me about that scene was he's explaining everything, and he's sort of saying, like, everything went back to normal, everything's fine now, I'm with the wife again, and We eat all organic now. The joke being that, of course, you do because you're scratching a living out of the dirt.
Yeah.
And then he says, yeah, I don't even miss the old foods. And then like an ice cream wrapper blows against the fence, and he like frantically grabs for it, and then like hangs his head in sorrow as it blows away. And it's like, in that moment, you sort of get that he's lying, that everything is okay. And it makes an interesting perspective. His character is really interesting in this movie because at first he's like, oh, he's the friend who has grown up, and Simon Pegg's character needs to be more like him.
Mm-hmm.
And what actually happens is the opposite. What actually happens is his character just goes completely off the rails, devolves into his younger self, and is right there next to Simon Pegg yelling at the aliens at the end, and is not the voice of reason at all anymore.
Yeah, and I
thought that was an interesting choice.
I think that's something to be said about how alcoholism destroys the people around you. How this disease like sucks people in and just spits them out. And that's very interesting, but then what is the movie trying to say by like clearly alcoholism is bad, clearly massive conformity is bad, clearly the ideal situation is somewhere in between these two extremes, but we don't really get that in this film.
Yeah,
but it's so good. Like the fact that we can sit here and talk about a movie which was billed as a group of 5 friends go on a raucous drinking night. Like there's so much more in this movie, and it's so great, and it has everything we've talked about in the other movies. Like they go to the 12 different pubs along their pub crawl, which there are 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's very intentional, but again, each of the pubs the names of them kind of predict what's going to happen there, and that's very cleverly done. That in the classic Edgar Wright style.
Yeah.
Anything more? Do you want to talk about The World's End? I could talk about this movie for another hour if we wanted to, but
I feel like we hit all the main points, and I would probably just like devolve into like thinking quietly about it rather than talking. So
all right. So let's go ahead, and if you were forced to rank them, which I don't know why I'm saying if, because you are, I'm forcing you to rank them right now. How would you rank these movies?
So I'm gonna make up a grading scheme, which is the order in which I would show these to someone who hadn't seen this director, because I can't answer the question of which one is the best.
Okay.
And I think I would actually start with Hot Fuzz, because I think that one is the most accessible, and it would sort of hook them and convince them that this was great and hilarious. And then I would do The World's End, because The World's End is not quite as accessible and a bit more confusing and a bit more dense, and maybe even a bit less funny. Maybe you'll want to fight me on that, but
I mean, there are funny parts in it, but I think it's dealing with a lot of heavy themes, so I think there's less laugh out loud humor.
Yeah. Then I'd probably do Shaun of the Dead, and then I'd probably do Scott Pilgrim. Not necessarily because Scott Pilgrim is. See, that's the thing, is I have such a it is the same director, but I just can't rank it in the same cosmos as the others. It feels totally different. So yeah, that's my fake ranking that dodges your intention.
That's fair. Mine would be World's End first. I think it's the best made and just my favorite of Edgar Wright's movies. I would put Scott Pilgrim next, and that's we didn't even get into my problems with that movie, which mostly center around the ending, but we'll save that conversation for another time, I guess. But I would put that second, and then Shaun of the Dead, and then lastly Hot Fuzz. And again, not because I think it's a bad movie. It's not. It's just my least favorite of 4 of my favorite movies ever. So that's
It's interesting that we both love these. We both love these movies, and yet we have an almost inverted preference ordering.
I know, that is weird.
Which says a lot about how you can like these movies in different ways.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, before we concluded on Edgar Wright, I just wanted to briefly touch on Ant-Man, because we right now, if everything had happened the way it should have, we would get to talk about a fifth movie right now, which is Ant-Man, because Edgar Wright worked on this film for about 10 years, and then he and Marvel separated ways due to creative differences. They were disagreeing with the direction that the film wanted to go. I love Peyton Reed's Ant-Man. I think that movie's really great, but it's hard to look at it and not wonder what Edgar Wright's version of that film would have looked like, especially after revisiting these four and really, cementing my opinion that he's one of our best filmmakers right now. I really wonder what that film would have looked like. And there are parts in that movie where you kind of see the Edgar Wright-isms a little bit, but I just rest in peace, Edgar Wright, Ant-Man. We'll never know you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the less Edgar Wright that movie gets, the worse it gets, and I think you like that movie more than I do, although I do think it's a very fun Marvel movie. And the parts of it that I do like are the rapid, quippy dialogue and the cutting between things quickly, and yeah.
I just wish there's an alternate universe in which we got to see that movie. Oh well.
I know. Someday.
Yeah.
Someday, Scott.
All right. I just wanted to bring up that Edgar Wright has a new movie coming out next year. So we will have a fifth movie eventually. This movie is called Baby Driver. It comes out March 17th. This is not with Simon Pegg or Nick Frost. This is a completely different cast. I think it has Kevin Spacey in it. The plot synopsis as it is a young talented getaway driver who works for different bank robbers gets in trouble when a robbery goes wrong. And I heard it was like a... What?
So it's Drive?
But I think it's going to be like a musical.
Oh.
I think Edgar Wright's described it as a musical.
Interesting.
Yeah, it has Jamie Foxx in it, John Hamm, Kevin Spacey. Wow, it's cool. So I'm very interested to see this movie, especially now. We will have to probably come back and have a podcast once we've both seen this movie and talk about it. But
yes, I think we have to.
So that's Edgar Wright. For those of you out there that maybe have seen these movies but never really thought of them or him in this way, we implore you to give them a second viewing or maybe a first viewing for some of them, although we kind of spoiled some of it. But I think that's okay because these movies work on so many different levels that even if it's spoiled, there's something to enjoy there.
Yeah, I had World's End spoiled for me totally before I watched it, and I don't think it affected my enjoyment.
That's great. That's awesome. All right, so before we go for this week, Matt, do you want to have a recommendation or what you've been watching or listening to? Or
yeah, there's this really great YouTube channel called Movies with Mikey, which you may have heard of, Scott, since you're the one who told me about it.
That's very well done.
Yeah, and sort of, you may or may not be familiar, audience, with the idea of a YouTube movie reviewer, but it's a genre that I like quite a bit, and this guy in particular is really good at it. He's very funny, and he's also very good at bringing out the emotional core of the movies he's talking about. He's very good at finding a movie that maybe you didn't even appreciate the first time you saw it, and as he's explaining, and talking through things and showing you clips, you're feeling the things that the that the movie was trying to make you feel, or maybe succeeded in making you feel, and overall, really fun.
Yeah,
to listen to.
Yeah, he's really great, and that's kind of his MO is he takes films that you might not have thought about a lot, or films that are generally considered less good. Like, I think one of his reviews is on Pearl Harbor, which is a movie that I don't think anyone would call a good film by any any measurement. And he talks about it enough to where you're like you start to, by the end of the video, you're like, I really appreciate what he's saying about what the certain parts of this movie that worked. And he's very honest with the parts that he thinks just didn't work at all, including the entire third act. But it's a really good channel. I completely agree. I obsessively watched every single one of them as soon as I found it.
Yeah, thanks for drawing my attention to that one. It was really, really worth it.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to talk briefly about a couple movies I saw. One of them, I don't know if I've ever talked about this on the podcast, Matt, but I know I talked about it to you in the past, that a couple years ago, I had a connection with the director Ira Sachs, who has directed Love is Strange, and I forgot the movie before it, but he's directed a few smaller indie movies, and I had a connection with him. Basically, Ira Sachs likes to fund his films through small donors instead of like big studios, because he likes to bring film fans into the world of film. So I had an opportunity to invest in one of his films after sitting down and talking, not sitting down, but through email talking with Ira Sachs. I decided not to, because it was a very large sum of money, basically all my money in savings, and investing in movies is not a generally good idea unless you are very rich or very, very confident. But all that being said, is the movie that I was talking about 2 years ago has come out now. It's called Little Men, and I saw it last week. And it's a pretty good movie. It's about two young men in New York City, or young boys, I guess. One of them, their mother works in a shop that is owned by the other one's parents after his grandfather dies. And basically those two families get in a squabble about the price of rent in this shop, and the two boys who are friends kind of get thrown into this conflict between their families and deal with it as boys would, by just like deciding to not talk to their parents until they fix their problems. So it's your kind of standard coming of age tale, but told in a new and interesting kind of way, because there's really like this conflict between these two families. There's really no right or wrong answer. Like each side is kind of right, and it kind of is about teaching these kids what adult conflict is actually like. It's good. It's getting good reviews. Hopefully it'll do well. He's a really talented director, so I would recommend that one.
Cool. Yeah. Where could one catch this movie?
I think it's in limited release now. I had to go to an art house theater here in Dallas. It's probably never going to go wide, just because like his films rarely do. But it'll be limited release, so check your art house theaters, and then it'll probably be on video on demand not long after that.
Cool. Yeah, and it's neat that you had some contact with the world of how films are made to the extent that you could have invested in one. And
yeah.
I agree, that's not something that I would do unless I were a lot more wealthy.
Yeah, and I got an opportunity to read the script, because obviously if you're going to invest in a movie, you want to know what it's about. So I liked the script, but like I wasn't completely blown away from it, and like I need to be part of this right now. And I told myself, like, if I liked the script so much that I was like, I have to be part of this movie, I would do it. But I thought it was just good, and that's kind of what the movie ended up being, is just good. But the cool thing about this is I read the script, and so I got to see from the first draft of the script to the finished product, I got to see what changes were made, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Did you notice anything in particular that jumps to mind?
Nothing huge. They changed some of the names of the characters, ironically. One character now has the name of the other character. And there's some one of the kids is very clearly, at least in the script, is very clearly gay. They left it kind of more open to interpretation in the film. It's hard to know if it was fully like telegraphed or if I'm just reading into it based on of my knowledge of the script. But like in the movie, I think one of the characters specifically tells that kid that he's gay. But that scene is not in the film, so I don't know if they cut it from the script or just got cut in post-production. But most of it was there. The core of the story was there, and the story went through, I think, 2 different names. Like when I got it, it was "Thank You for Being Honest," and now it's Little Men, and I think it had another name in between. So it's kind of fun to see all these changes that go on in the process.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, that's it for this week for us. I'm gonna do this once again. I did it last week, but I'm gonna do it again. If you are listening to this on iTunes, we would really, really appreciate it if you take the time to search our podcast on iTunes and do all the annoying things to leave reviews. We really rely on reviews because that's how iTunes and how the rankings on different podcasts and how it shows up on all this stuff is based on actual reviews. Doesn't have to be a 5-star review. It can be whatever you think we're worth. But if you people listening could just take the couple minutes it takes to go do that, we would really, really appreciate it. Also, if you really like what you do, well, like what we do, and want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. This podcast is free. We want it to keep being free, but it costs money to host stuff, and we would love any support that we could get. Matt, before we conclude, where are you on the internet?
I am on Twitter at @MoreDinTheMail.
There you go. I am also on Twitter at ScottDaly85. That's DALY. And you can find both of our writing at dailyplanetfilms.com. It's also where you'll find all episodes of this podcast, any movie reviews we do, also any information on what we're doing next. Because next week is episode 5 of the Kryptonian Collection.
All right.
The Kryptonian Collection is our monthly podcast where we bring a movie and debate and discuss its merit and discuss if it's good enough to be in the illustrious Kryptonian Collection. And this month, we're doing my pick, Speed Racer, one of the best movies ever. So if you have seen that movie, or if you want to listen to our podcast next week and haven't seen the movie, take the time and see it, and then come and see if I am convincing enough to convince Matt and some other people that this is a good enough movie to be put into our great collection. All right. I guess, Matt, this is all we had. We have no guests to say thank you to, so I don't know what to do here at the very end. This is different.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you
audience.
Out there, audience. Yeah. And we will see you all next week.
The podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next